All right. So thanks again for joining tonight. My name's Auri, Rahimzadeh. You can just call me Auri. I'm a full-time software engineer at Valorum Reply, and I also own a small company here in Indy called Auri's Ideas. Built a number of apps, had some pretty cool ones, some that were just kind of hobby, but built a lot of Xamarin apps, been there for a long time in that Xamarin ecosystem. If you want to reach out to me on Twitter, it's just @Auri on Twitter. I was one of the first people to get their name on Twitter, and the funny story behind that, I went to a tweet up. I don't know if anybody remembers those, but I had never heard of it, and so they said, "Oh, you totally have to get a Twitter account." And I'm like, "Oh, great. Okay, let's do that." And so I got Auri, and for 3 months my password was password. So this is before Twitter was really anything. No one took my account. It was Auri@Auri.net, and my account was Auri, with a password of password, because their website would not let me change my password for 3 months. So lucky enough to get it, and apparently lucky enough not to lose it. So tonight's presentation, we're going to go through a little bit of a history lesson. How we got here, how we got to MAUI, and really .NET 5 and 6. And an interesting question I was thinking about here was, and I'm not a slide reader, but still, how do you as a Microsoft developer use Microsoft technology to target every platform? Let's stop .NET and C# from relegating us as becoming or being considered only back-end and Windows developers. We know C#. That doesn't mean that we can only write code that runs on Windows. And Microsoft's definitely moving us in that direction. Has made great progress, phenomenal progress. But let's revisit this just from a historical perspective to understand why this is so important that we are where we are today. So it helps to start with just the evolution of Windows UIs. So how have we built applications that the user can use in Windows over the course of our Microsoft development careers? So I'm going to concentrate on Windows. I'm not going to go the MS-DOS side, because I mean none of that was all whole mishigas. If you want to talk about GEOS and all that other stuff and deskmate, yay, but different talk. So first we started out really code-based. When you would build your Windows apps, you C, C++, maybe assembly, and then things got human, and we got Visual Basic, and we ended up getting eventually WinForms and event-driven development, and it was just drag and drop, and it was where everyone was able to build an application relatively quickly. Even if they didn't know a lot of code, you could fumble your way through it. Problem was, of course, that wasn't the same way as the C#, or probably the C++. It was a whole new way of doing things, with WinForms. And then Microsoft dropped on us, hey, you know what? We want you to be able to use these Microsoft technologies on the web to build UI, and not Flash. So because we want you to remember particular set of skills. We want you to use Microsoft tech to build all your web stuff. So yeah, Windows, you'll use WinForms, but for the web, you'll use Silverlight and maybe WPF. Great, that's wonderful. And Silverlight will use XAML, and it'll be great, but it'll be totally different than WinForms. So now you have WinForms, and you have 2 different ways, maybe even 3 different ways to build your UI. Then they dropped on us UWP, which had its own derivations on XAML, and started pushing us towards Metro, Modern, because they got sued for Metro. And it was another way of doing things. So now you've got your your codebase stuff, you've got your WinForms stuff, you've got your Silverlight stuff, you've got your UWP stuff, all relatively incompatible. I mean, the back end code is somewhat compatible, but the front end not. And then we got not from Microsoft, but from the Xamarin team, Xamarin. So we have Windows covered, we have the web covered, and then we have Windows covered again in another way. But what about multiple devices? Well, here's what we'll do. You're going to still have to do the AXML and the storyboards and zibs and nibs for Android and iOS. But you'll be able to share that code. And you'll be able to use C# and you'll be able to build for these devices, but yeah, your UI won't move over. So we still have this problem that if we wanted to support web and desktop and mobile, we have at least 3 different, or probably 4, at least 3 different presentation tier approaches, UI approaches, totally disparate UI technologies. So the Xamarin team came up with something pretty sweet to solve this problem. And that was Xamarin.Forms. So Xamarin.Forms was, hey, you know what? How can we take this awesome code reuse and apply that same thing to the UI? Because we're seeing the problem. We're seeing the problem with WinForms, Silverlight, XAML, UWP with Metro and Modern, and we won't even get into the distribution issues that we have with those for shipping your apps. Let's bring all that together and abstract it. So they came up with Xamarin.Forms, which was pretty amazing, even in its 1.0 form, but definitely 2.0. Using XAML, for the most part, you could build an iOS, an Android, and a Windows app. You couldn't do web, but it really, I think, gave Microsoft something to ponder of, how could we maybe do this ourselves? So shortly after Xamarin.Forms came out, Microsoft acquired the Xamarin team. I don't know if this was related, but I could see them seeing where this is going. Because around the time that they purchased the Xamarin product team, was when .NET Core was starting to take shape. So pretty cool stuff. And then as time went on, because Xamarin.Forms is what, 5 years old now? 4 or 5 years old? I think it's about 4. Let's see, when did I sell my software? 4 years old. I think it's 4 or 5 years old. I don't remember exactly. Microsoft started pushing, not pushing hard, but pushing XAML standard. Like, okay, we have a few different versions of XAML. We got one that was from Silverlight. We got one for UWP. We got one in Xamarin. We're going to come up with a XAML standard. Okay, cool. I don't know if that went anywhere, but you can kind of see as Microsoft developers, we've had to learn just from the UI standpoint, code, WinForms, Silverlight, and XAML, and another flavor of XAML, and a couple other platforms to do UI, and then yet another flavor of XAML, and then another flavor of XAML, and we're like, stop the madness. This is crazy. Stop this. Yeah, we're learning so much, but just stick with one thing. I mean, technology, that's a hard promise to make, but pivoting a lot is very difficult, and it can get expensive. And the same thing happened with Microsoft development. So just the UI side of it was nuts, even though we've started to see things moving towards consolidation. Look at how Microsoft development has moved. And if you're a Xamarin developer, you can definitely, I imagine, feel my pain. But if you've been in the Microsoft ecosystem for a long time, like 20 plus years, this timeline is probably, even though we're going down this way, this is probably your level of frustration. So we started out writing things in C and assembly, and then Visual Basic made things easier. We won't get into the purist argument about Visual Basic, and we won't talk about VBA much. And these things weren't really much compatible with each other, but we did get COM, which introduced DLL hell. And then we got VBA, which, by the way, was not Visual Basic. It just looked like it, kind of like JavaScript isn't Java. But then this started consolidating a little bit into .NET. So yeah, let's move away from this, and we'll move to .NET. As Microsoft developers, we're very used to the ebbs and flows of new technology. You know, it's like every couple years, Microsoft, you know, back then, not recently, but back then, Microsoft would release some new solution, sometimes ending with the letter X, and it would be possibly incompatible or partially compatible with what came before it. The rewards were great, but the risk was high, you know, because why should I throw in my existing code base? But getting back to this, so with .NET, that was a great dream. Like, really, we got a lot of mess here. We need to start cleaning it up. But man, we ran into messes, right? We had COM and .NET and that interop. If anybody remembers .NET interop and how bad that was, and bringing in those old DLLs and trying to make things compatible. It got a lot better as we got to .NET 4 and above, but if you remember the growth of .NET 1.0 all the way to before 4, yikes, that was quite the growing pain. And then the Xamarin people were not excluded from this nightmare, because what we had was Mono, which wasn't exactly .NET, but you know, Xamarin originally, there was no mobile version of .NET. There was no Mac version of the CLI. There wasn't an iOS version of it. There wasn't an Android version of it. So Mono was the open source solution to making .NET work cross-platform. Well, that's great, but it wasn't officially .NET. So what do? Well, you could still write C# and generally everything worked. So it really wasn't a problem. Like, behind the scenes, unless you ran into the Mono issues with Xamarin, you never really noticed that Mono was your problem. But sometimes you did, and you had to switch between different Mono versions. That's a whole different story recently. But we had Mono and Xamarin. And then in order to share the code between these different well, let me show this. So these all worked with Windows. And, well, this did too. But then Xamarin, PCL, these had issues because, well, were you targeting Silverlight and the web? Well, if so, you could only use a subset of .NET, which was handled by PCL, which meant portable class library. So when you wrote your code, you had to hope that whatever features you wanted to use were available in the special, like 110, 105, 144. There were all these numbers that said whether this would work with Silverlight, with Windows, with what was it? With, I don't remember all the versions, but yeah, there was like, I think there was like even Xbox. I don't remember what the details were, but the way PCL worked, where it was portable class library, it wasn't very portable. It was just really bad, and you usually had conflicts, and you couldn't get some functionality that you needed. Then you had other issues like mixing .NET framework code or framework class libraries and its DLLs with PCL DLLs. These wouldn't be compatible because the PCL was targeting the wrong thing. Even though you built the portable class library with .NET, it wasn't fully compatible with .NET as you would think of it as a developer. So this, you can see just from all the lines on here, just try and figure out what was compatible with each other across all of this. It wasn't a thing. It was oftentimes going down a rabbit hole, and sometimes you just give up and say, well, you know what? I'm not going to target Windows. I'm just going to target iOS and Android because Windows won't support whatever I need to do with this PCL, so forget it. So cleaning all this mess up, we started to get some semblance of solidarity right about here. So all this stuff Microsoft finally saw and said, what are we doing? What are we doing, guys? If you've ever read clean code, it's the WTFs per minute. I'll bet that number was straight up. So given that, Microsoft started pushing us towards .NET Standard and .NET Core and said, we're going to solve the problem of PCL. We're going to hopefully eventually solve this whole problem of mono because we're going to go open source. And we're going to solve the problem of interop. We're going to solve the problem of code compatibility. We're going to solve a lot of problems. We'll get that to the next slide. And you've seen that happen. And now we have, we still have some issues, right? You know, we have .NET Core and .NET Standard, but then we still have some conflicts right now that we're getting through, like when you have a .NET framework project combined with a .NET Standard project, a Xamarin project plus .NET Standard plus PCL. The point is, this is all a big mess, and Microsoft has been listening to us. So, how have they been thinking about this? I think Microsoft's been pushing us towards this journey to one.NET, and there's a video that I've got at the end of this that I'm not going to play the video. But I've got a link to it, and I'll put a link in the YouTube video for this. But the journey to one.NET, let's stop the madness. Let's stop the closed source stuff. Let's make .NET a first-class citizen when it comes to your development solution. Not just .NET for backend or just .NET for Windows. .NET everywhere. So here's how we're going to do this. We're going to make it available on, heck, we'll make it available on a watch, a phone, a tablet, Linux, Mac, Windows Server. Anywhere you want to run .NET, you're going to be able to run .NET. And by the way you're going to be able to run it is you'll write it and you can run it on any platform as long as it follows this chart of capabilities, which .NET Standard and .NET Core finally solidified for us in a relatively easy to understand way. You have version numbers that as the version numbers get higher, you get more capability. So as long as you built for one version number, you know that you have everything that came before that version number. You know, that version number plus everything before it, which was fascinating because you no longer have to worry about, well, okay, what version of this maps to what version of this and maps to this, and how do I combine those, and what's compatible, and will I need to find this NuGet stuff, that NuGet stuff, and no more mess. You're just like, oh, I wrote it in C#, I targeted .NET Standard VX, .NET Core VX, and this is what I get. Good, it's understood. And you know what? If you don't like it, fix it, because it's open source. If you have a problem with .NET, you have an opportunity to make it better because .NET is open source. Now, .NET Framework, they're moving away from .NET Framework. It's not going away where you won't be able to run your apps anymore, but they're moving you towards .NET Standard and .NET Core. Now, that's not a bad thing because for the most part, the namespaces are the same. The transition to that should not be hard. And especially if you're a Xamarin developer, for the last year and a half or two, you should have been doing .NET Standard anyway, because the mess of the PCLs and the shared libraries has effectively gone away thanks to that team. So a guiding light on getting to one.NET on at least the UI and multi-device side, Xamarin's a very good example of how that can be done. And if you ever want to see an example of how some of that stuff worked, I'm happy to show you. Now, from the very beginning, Microsoft wanted to go and create what's now going to be called .NET 5. So .NET Framework is no longer going to be called .NET Framework, starting with .NET 5. .NET 5 is what is going to be .NET Standard, .NET Core, and that's it going forward. .NET Framework stops at what, 4, 8? I'm not sure what the number is, but anything prior to 5, that's the last versions of Framework. And the cool thing about .NET 5 is its goal is to consolidate desktop, web, and server development. It'll also have some other updates to how UI is handled. And then you can only do so much at once. So .NET 6 will actually add mobile to the mix. So .NET 5 is where you're going to want to be when it comes to desktop, web, and server dev. But then mobile, .NET 6. So that's at least a year away. So the cool things are, along with the one.NET journey, they're consolidating everything into well-known namespaces. So you really do write once, run everywhere for the most part. I mean, obviously, a full-blown Windows app, you're not going to run it on a watch, limitation of the device. But the libraries will be there. Then a lot of consolidation. So where you used to find a lot of places all over, they're doing a lot of consolidation. So a lot of cleanup, a lot of, which version of this do I use? You'll have everything in one namespace. Now, to be fair, it's kind of like when you clean your home and then everything gets out of place later on. Who knows if that's what's going to happen as time goes on? But so far from what I've been seeing, they've done a very good job of just keeping things neat and tidy and continuing along that path. So we've seen this thing before. The whole, write once, run anywhere. Yeah, it's a great dream. It's Microsoft. This isn't the first time we've heard this. If you've been in the game long enough, write once, run anywhere is just it's a promise that has often been broken. And the point of it, though, is, hey, I should be able to write my software once. And with very few tweaks to no tweaks, I should be able to run it anywhere. Because I don't want to pay to maintain my application across multiple platforms. This is very true even in game development, where you have common game engines like Unity, where you build the app for the most part once, and then you can ship it across multiple platforms. But when it comes to more generalized development rather than game development, that's not really the case. We sort of had it with C, like way in the beginning. If you wrote something in C, it would compile anywhere. It didn't cover the UI, but you could kind of run it anywhere. Simple utilities. Java, you were able to write it and sort of run it everywhere, but the problem is that when it got to the destination platform, it didn't really look like an app from that platform. You notice like buttons didn't look the same, drop-down lists weren't the same. It was slow. And one of the other issues with the JVMs that were out there is that there were multiple versions of it. So there wasn't like one single JVM owned at the time by Sun. Mac OS had its own, Microsoft had its own, Sun had its own, IBM had their own. I remember this mess. And if you didn't have the right one installed, that class file that you ran wouldn't load because of some issue with the JVM. But you were told, oh, it's a Java app, should work. Oh, well, you should install this JVM. So it's almost like, well, install this version of Windows on Windows. It was very bad. The Java experience, great promise, absolutely failed execution. Now, a great solution, though, to write once, run anywhere has been the web. We've definitely seen it. We're kind of using it right now with Teams. As I recall, Teams is an Electron app. It's written in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then uses probably SignalR and various REST APIs through Graph, to bring you the experience that you've got. But that application is written with JavaScript. So Pretty fascinating. You could take a JavaScript powered solution and run it on almost any device. It runs on watches. It runs in the cloud, like Node. It runs on on mobile with, say, React or native scripts, or React Native and native script. It runs on the web with React and Angular. It runs already, like I said, on the desktop with Electron and I think Atomic. I think that's another one. So pretty fascinating. JavaScript is that, like, as long as you know it, you can write for basically any platform. But JavaScript doesn't cover the UI issue. And of course it's JavaScript. So, you live with JavaScript because it's like a necessary evil. But then again, I'm generally a .NET developer, so I'm not trying to start a religious war. I was not gaslighting, I promise you. Xamarin got us close because you could write your entire application in C#, but then it didn't handle the UI. But it was pretty cool being able to take your backend server, your WinForms app or UWP app, all your service tiers, your common models, your utility tier, all that stuff, maybe even caching, who knows what, and reuse all of that in your mobile app. Which meant if you fixed something, like if you found a bug in your mobile app, you could fix the logic in one place and probably fix it across, well, basically everywhere. If you found a bug, it was really write once, run anywhere, which gets back to that whole share code, lower cost. You don't have to hire an iOS and an Android developer. You hire a .NET developer. Now, to be fair, just for those who are new to Xamarin, knowing C# .NET does not make you an Android or iOS developer. You still need to understand how iOS works and Android works. Just like if you're a WinForms developer that knows C#, that does not make you a good backend API developer, because you're used to possibly one user using one computer at one time, not 1,000 users making 10,000 requests a minute to a server at one time. So just knowing the language doesn't translate to the next platform. Now, Xamarin.Forms solved the problem with Xamarin, which was, okay, now we're going to handle the UI part of it, and you'll have even more code reuse, even more savings, even lower cost. But there were trade-offs, and it wasn't exactly Windows. Like, it wasn't somewhere where you were replacing all your Windows apps suddenly with Xamarin. It was really mobile first. Even though UWP was in there, it wasn't exactly building Windows apps. And it also had this, it still has this kind of strange structure of the Franken project, where your resources, while the code and the UI might be shareable, the resources are not. Like, you have to treat fonts a certain way on Android, and you have to treat them another way on iOS, and then another way on UWP. And then if you want to target Tizen, which Xamarin supports for the Mac, still similar issues. So you don't get 100% reuse, but it's very good. It's really good. If you've used it, it's very nice. React Native was an interesting process. It was kind of like what Xamarin.Forms was doing. But with JavaScript. So, like, if you already knew .NET, you could build, with Xamarin, if you already knew C# and .NET, you could build a mobile app and a Mac app and a Tizen app, and boom, you're done. React Native was kind of the same thing, but for JavaScript. Now, it had limitations because JavaScript doesn't make like Cocoa libraries or jars. So while React Native was very cool, and if you were already a JavaScript shop, it made sense to go the React Native route or the native script route because you could reuse your code. The problem was that if you wanted to get into a feature that didn't exist in React Native, you had to drop in and go build your Java jar or your Swift. Was it a nib? Not a nib, a CocoaPod? I don't know. I don't remember what the shareable library is in in iOS. But you basically have to go drop into the native platform and write it in that language. So for iOS, it would be Objective-C or Swift, and then on Android, it would be Java. So all of a sudden, you're losing the benefit of JavaScript because you got to have guys that know Android and iOS to support the additional components. Whereas Xamarin.Forms, everything is C#. So you could write the additional components you needed all in C# and you'd still get a native library out of it, which was the big difference with Xamarin versus like React Native. So MAUI, we'll get to that in a bit. The keys here are, it sounds like Microsoft's moving us all in one direction, but back to my original premise, as Microsoft developers and C# devs, we're kind of thought of as back-end guys, back-end developers. We're, Windows developers, maybe server, but, you're a .NET developer. I need a web guy. And that's a JavaScript guy. Or if I'm mobile, I need a Java guy or a Swift or iOS guy. And that's a bummer because C# is a fantastic language. F#, very good. From what I've heard, I'm not an F# guy. But why? Why do we need how can we take that knowledge of ours to all the other areas of software development? Why do we have to keep using these helper languages? Like when we're building a website, why do we have to write so much stuff in JavaScript just to do front end stuff? Why can't we use C#? And that's where Microsoft is now pushing us. They've consolidated the .NET framework for the most part into .NET Standard and .NET Core. And now they're expanding the .NET languages, specifically right now C#, to be first-class citizens for things other than back-end development. So look at Blazor. You can use C# to build the front end now too, and mix C# with HTML and have a front end experience that you call into .NET libraries, and boom, you can code the exact same way using the same namespaces and do it all on the front end. And you can instantly, there's other cool things. We did a presentation last month about Blazor. If you go take a look at that, you can learn more about it. Nick George presented it. Great presentation. But really the question is why aren't we using C# the same informal way we use every other language? Like, why can't we use C# instead of JavaScript or instead of Python? We already have this skill, so let's go and reuse it across all the platforms, across all the devices, across any need that we have, rather than, this one requires JavaScript, this one requires Python because I need to write it quickly. So that's where Microsoft is pushing us now. And .NET, which I'm calling soon the framework formerly known as .NET Core, is this path forward, and it will bring that consolidation for us. So this has brought us to MAUI on the UI side. So if you don't know what it is, it's multi-application UI. It was announced at Build a couple months ago, and it's not entirely new. I mean, it's going to be all new, but it's not going to be one of those Microsoft's throwing something away and forcing us to learn something new. That's not it. It's not that again. It's an evolution of Xamarin.Forms. So if you already know Xamarin.Forms, you're going to be right at home with .NET MAUI. So if you're already a C# developer, you already know like XAML, and especially if you know Xamarin.Forms, you're going to be good to go. Of course, there'll be a learning curve. It's new, but good to go. So you still get a cross-platform native UI, but they're getting rid of that whole Franken project thing. We'll get into that in more detail in a bit. I'll show you some examples. But a single project, single code base. So kind of like you'll build, just like you built a WinForms app, you could build a Xamarin app. And that's it. You don't have your Xamarin app, like your Xamarin.Forms app, and then your iOS app here, and then your Android app here, and they're just calling into the Xamarin.Forms instance. That's gone. It's just going to be a .NET MAUI app, and you move forward. Now, this isn't going to be available this year. It'll be available in preview this year, but it's not going to be finalized this year. It's coming in .NET 6. We'll get into details in a bit. Cool things, though. Remember, Microsoft's concentrating on consolidation of everything into .NET Standard, .NET Core. So Xamarin is going to be absorbed into system.ui. It's just another UI inside of .NET. That's it. It's going to be part of .NET's UI. It's not going to be Xamarin.Forms in .NET. It's going to be in system.ui, and you get it, which is pretty sweet. Xamarin Essentials, if you don't know what it is, that's a library of a whole bunch of very cool capabilities that are cross-platform device capabilities that Xamarin Essentials then exposes to you. There's more to it than that, but the key is that's also going to be moved in following that namespace consolidation into system.devices. Now, right now, I don't know that I fully agree that that's where Xamarin Essentials should go, because I know Xamarin Essentials. This is all subject to change. So what I'm telling you now might be different next month as to where they end up putting these things. But the gist of what MAUI is going to bring you is not changing. Now, all the native namespaces, so if you do Xamarin development and you're accessing, like UI kit and so forth, and the Google APIs, all those namespaces, those are staying the same. Those aren't touching. Those aren't being touched, which makes sense because those aren't part of .NET, really. Those are part of the various platforms. iOS's SDK, that's iOS. Android's SDK, that's Android. That's not part of .NET. Nothing's stopping you from calling into it, just like any other library that you've got. So that's not going to change. It's not going to be a paradigm shift for how you write components for the native languages. How you do that, I'm still curious because I haven't seen good examples of that yet, but we'll get there. Now, the other thing, we're no longer going to have Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android. That goes away. And as I understand it, Mono finally goes away. Yes, we'll finally have .NET written by Microsoft as part of the open source projects, and it'll be the same everywhere. Not, oh, this one has an issue with Mono. No more of that mess, which should give us a performance improvement. That's my thought anyway. So that's going to be, now it's going to be called .NET for Android and .NET for iOS. So no more 50 different JVMs like Java had issues with. Nope. There's going to be this one runtime for each platform, everything's set, which is finally great. And as I said before, if you have a problem with any of this, you can change it because .NET is open source, MAUI is open source, Xamarin is open source. You can go look at that right now and start taking a look at it. Now, what happens to you if you're a .NET developer, you're a Microsoft developer, or you're a Xamarin developer with MAUI? Well, the good news is nothing's changed. If you want to build your UI in XAML, because remember, this is multi-application UI, you can do that. If you want to write it with code, you can do that. And the reactive extensions, you can still do that. None of that's going away. But you might know, oh, and of course, MVVM. If you're a Xamarin developer, MVVM, that's not going away. These two go together pretty well. So I just kind of say XAML. But you'll notice a couple cool things here. Cool new ones. MVU, Model View Update, and Blazor. What's this? We'll get into that. So MVU is pretty cool. So this is what MVU looks like. So it's code-based UI generation. Look how cool this is. Body of the application. It's a new stack layout. Add a label, add a button, and here's the functionality for it. Isn't that awesome? I'm looking forward to playing with this. From what I've seen, it's very cool. Yeah. Now, I am a XAML guy. I like building my apps with Xamarin.Forms. I like XAML, but I have no problem with this, especially if I'm writing like reusable components. This could be very useful. We'll see. You know, it's always on a case-by-case basis with any sort of software. Now, even cooler for all of you folks that are like, well, why wouldn't I just use React? Well, you don't have to. If you know Blazor, you could use HTML-like syntax. No, Laney, you can't present. You could use HTML-like syntax and then wire up code, just like in Blazor, because it is Blazor. It's called Mobile Blazor Bindings right now, but isn't that amazing? So this is coming with MAUI, and you can actually use Mobile Blazor Bindings now, I believe. So this is something I definitely want to play around with, but pretty fascinating, especially if you know HTML pretty well, and you're more comfortable, or you're comfortable with Blazor or Razor. This works out really well for you. So on top of these two cool new MVU and mobile Blazor bindings, everything is consolidated. So everything that you used to do separately before, that you would manage in your Android app, you'd manage in your iOS app, and you'd manage in your UWP app, and you'd manage in your macOS app, and you'd manage in your Tizen app, and they were all incompatible, like the different sizes of things, the fonts, there's just a lot of issues. All of that gets consolidated. So all your fonts end up in a resources fonts folder. Everything that's an image ends up in resources images. How easy is that? On the platform side, you put your platform specific code in the specific folders for those apps or those platforms. Simple, clean. Now, how they're going to do the more complex stuff, like if I have a lot of stuff in there, I'm not sure what that looks like yet. But then again, this is very Canary. Canary is basically Microsoft's term for alpha. Now, Microsoft is not abandoning Xamarin for MAUI this year. They're going to just stop development on it. That's not happening at all. What's happening, they're going to continue updating Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Android, Xamarin.Forms while MAUI is being developed, and it should be a clean transition. Because based on everything I'm seeing, a lot of that stuff's just moving into the consolidated area and the new namespaces. And I'm not even sure that there's going to be a lot of namespace change, other than instead of bringing in Xamarin.Forms, using Xamarin.Forms, you'll say using system.ui. So it doesn't seem like it would be rough, and it seems better. I was also talking with the mFractor team. If you haven't used mFractor, that's like ReSharper for Xamarin developers, and now it's available on Windows too, which is very cool. It's an absolute necessary toolkit to have if you're a Xamarin developer. It just makes everything so much easier. They will support that. This also, one thing I didn't bring up, which I was just looking at my bullet point, there's no more special treatment of resources. So if you've ever written an iOS or an Android app, and you've been missing that one image that you forgot to drag into one of your drawable folders, but you did add it to iOS and things look weird, this is going to solve that stuff for you, which is really useful. Also very cool, you'll be able to debug in Windows. Not that you couldn't do that right now, but you can plug in an iPhone and debug on Windows. It'll also debug in a Windows emulator, just like kind of the UWP stuff by default, so that because it's all MAUI, you can launch that immediate fast emulator if you like, but you don't have to. It's very slick, very slick. And I'll get into this, but if you really want to, you can write your app with VS Code. So what does some of this stuff look like? So remember I was saying that everything's consolidated. Look right here. There's just a platforms folder. So there's your XAML. There's your app that kicks things off. But look at that. You just have platforms and resources. That's it. Nice and clean. No more Franken project. And you can see how this expands. Look how nice that is. There's all your true type fonts. There's where your images go. So much cleaner. Now, what about those dependencies? Right? Like if you have your own Bluetooth adapter, there you go. There's your different implementations of things. Nice and clean. I'm very excited about this if you can't tell. This is where you could plug in your iPhone and start debugging to it. Very cool stuff. You'll also see the package reference. It's just system.maui, system device. So this is Xamarin.Forms and this is Xamarin Essentials. So let's move on. Very excited about this. Yep. Take a look here. So let's do a little bit of a breakdown of kind of what's changing, like what are the impacts going to be for you. For the most part, I don't think this will be a problem. So Xamarin.Forms versus MAUI. So Android 19 versus 21 plus. Okay, so if you need to use earlier versions of Android, okay. Now keep in mind, this doesn't come out for a little bit. So where are we at right now? APA, where are we at? 23? I got to remember. I don't look at those numbers that often. But you should be relatively safe with this. However, you're not really running into a lot of issues sticking with Xamarin.Forms for now. This does not mean that you have to update your Xamarin.Forms application to MAUI because everything will suddenly stop working come December of next year. That's not what's happening. So you have time to get used to this and figure out how you might move. Cool things you'll see now. Microsoft is supporting a lot more. So Microsoft will support the Windows implementation. Microsoft will support the Mac OS implementation. So if you want to write Mac apps, yay. They already take care of the Android and iOS side for us. Linux will still be supported by the community, ties in, of course, by Samsung. Now, they're loosely coupling things now. So instead of everything having to worry about bindable objects, they're hoping to get performance improvements by loosely coupling them. You'll also see the stuff that I already talked about, the additional stuff like the Blazor mobile bindings and MVU. You'll see we're single project now, multi-targeting, multi-window, pretty cool stuff. Now, little gotcha here. This is using .NET 6 because remember, it's .NET for iOS and .NET for Android. The beautiful thing here, I feel at least, is mono goes away. No more of this mono stuff. If you've ever dealt with mono issues, it is not a fun thing to diagnose. They've actually hidden the ability to set the mono version behind a feature flag in the latest versions of Visual Studio. I got stuck with that recently. I asked about it. They're like, oh, yeah, we put that behind a feature flag. I'm like, oh, thank you. So you can just follow this, SDK style, .NET CLI, yes. You could even build your stuff with Visual Studio Code if you so desire. They did have an example of that in the video that I was telling you about, which I will link to. Now, when are we going to get this? Well, the preview is going to come this winter. So maybe around .NET Conf, when .NET 5 is officially released. I think that's around November. But it's this winter. And the key is it will likely be part of a .NET 6 preview. So MAUI is not part of .NET 5. You don't get MAUI in .NET 5, but you should be getting it in the preview of .NET 6. Now, they've been very clear that this is a lot of work. This isn't just like a feature update with a new name. This is a ground-up rewrite of the renderers. And doing .NET for iOS and .NET for Android, that's a pretty big effort. I can only imagine it's a lot of work. So kudos to them for taking on this big bite. But the expected release date is next winter. So my guess is, because it looks like, the yearly cadence of .NET versions, if that's going to be the case, then you'd be seeing it in winter of 2021. So we'll see though. Now, what about Windows? Now, Microsoft to Build talked about they're coming out with WinUI 3. So UWP is basically becoming WinUI 3. My guess, this is my guess, they didn't speak to it, is that all of this is going to end up rolling into system.ui. And so my guess is UWP eventually is going to become MAUI. So I'm hoping, because I'd like to see just UWP and all this stuff, like these new names, go away, and you just write everything with MAUI. So we'll see. We'll see. Too early to say. Now, does MAUI solve everything? Does it give us the write once, run anywhere solution? I think it's pretty close, but we don't know yet. So I'm excited for it. I'm cautiously optimistic, but it seems that especially with Xamarin, Microsoft has delivered on their promises. I don't know if you ever listened to the Xamarin podcast, but you always see them adding new features, and they're very open about working with the community. So if there's some new capability that somebody wants and they write it and they do a pull request and it gets accepted, it becomes part of Xamarin. I mean, that's pretty cool. That kind of access to eating your own dog food and getting yourself better dog food. I just don't know that I've seen the like of it before. So very excited. We'll see in Q4 where this goes. We've heard this promise before, but it seems like they're getting there, and they have the right team to do it. If you've seen their work, they definitely seem to have the right team to do it. And to be fair, as Xamarin developers, other than like the Frankenproj kind of thing, Xamarin's pretty amazing. You can do some pretty amazing stuff with it, and ship a phenomenal product. And it's still cross-platform. You don't have to hire all these extra developers just to support each platform. Really you just need a contractor for the UI, and then your .NET guys can take care of pretty much everything else. There's a lot to be said about that versus bringing in contractors for the iOS and the Android side to handle that language part of all your .NET stuff. But we'll see. I hope that this is going in the direction it seems it is, where we have a great product. So we'll definitely learn more later this year. So if you want to learn more, here's some links. I'm going to go and put these out there so you don't have to go and write these down or screenshot it or whatever. I'll post the link to this video after it's processed on the .NET Consortium website, on the meetup site. So I don't know what the .NET Foundation is going to do. They usually link to the video as well, but I don't know how that works. So MAUI on GitHub, if you want to see it today, just go right there. This is a fascinating discussion about how Microsoft got to 1.NET. So check that out. If you want to see what .NET 6 looks like, take a look. There's a good little intro to MAUI and why right there. The reactive extensions, I haven't used them as much, but hey, if you want to learn more about them, right there, the RxUI, and then if you want to learn more about those mobile Blazor bindings, right there. Erase all my little messages. And that's all I got for this evening. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll stick around for some questions. See if I can switch back. There we go. Cool. Thanks, Jay. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to ask. I'm glad that you liked it. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Dominic. Thanks, John. Yay. Thank you, Monty. Any questions, comments? And if you have any questions, any more comments about Ozcode? Well, I mean, I'm clearly a big fan of Ozcode, so I use it all the time across all my machines. So I've been using it for a while. Someone brought that up. Oh yeah, I did miss the compact framework. You're right. You know what? I actually wrote. Anyone ever seen those websites that like make random Shakespearean insults or buzzword generators? Like you choose one thing from column A, column B, column C. So I wrote this buzzword generator for. Actually, I've written for the Newton, but I ended up writing it in Windows CE with embedded VB with the .NET Compact framework. Yep. And I have stories about that, by the way. So you can make 5th generation hardware contingency scenarios with time phase management opportunity to further the corporate stratagem. That's like the kind of BS that I can make with the app, just by choosing from the different columns. But funny story about the compact framework. If you get a speeding ticket in Indiana, I wrote the software that writes you the ticket. So me and my team, but it was my company, and it was we had a lot of memory leaks because we had to write it in .NET CE, and oh man, you were calling the garbage collector all the time. It was this Windows CE handheld device, and you were constantly calling GC collect because of a leak, a memory leak in the bitmap handling. So to have a good UI, we had to do all this stuff behind the scenes to make it not terrible. That's a great question. My guess is that I know they were talking about pairing with them, Tandy. So shoot me an email, and I'll see if I can get you an answer for that. My guess is that it's going to be the same thing that they did with .NET for iOS and .NET for Android. That they're just going to do that same thing, basically probably a one-to-one thing to move you over to .NET. But I don't know. That's just a guess. So I'll try to get you that answer. But shoot me an email. Here's my email address. Let me answer the Ozcode question, and then I'll answer that other question from you, Tom. So Ozcode, if you haven't used it, please use it. It's very cool. Especially when it comes to like link debugging or exporting objects. But take a look. If you send us your emails, or if you send me an email about it. So again, I put my email address in there. I'll choose someone to get the Ozcode win. No, lady, you can't give away Ozcode, and you couldn't use it. So anyway, it'd be funny. No, you can't use Ozcode. Now, let me look at Tom's question. I'm pretty new to C# and .NET. Wanting to get deeper, but I don't want to paint myself into corners. From what I'm gathering here, I should probably focus on learning and building in Blazor and Xamarin. Well, it's up to you what you want to do. so one thing I have found is that Xamarin, web or mobile, gives you kind of a sense of accomplishment that feels really good. You know, the API, when you go and you build an API, you can't really show off an API, but you know, you could build a mobile app and kind of get your feet wet on building the application and what you want it to do, and then that will actually naturally lead you along the path to building an API that you interact with. So I think going either a Xamarin or a Blazor route and starting with kind of like stuff you can kind of see and play around with will lead you along the path to building out all the other structure of your application. If you haven't used that, if you haven't used Microsoft Learn before, check out Microsoft Learn. Let me send you a link here. Microsoft, let's see, Microsoft Learn. And they have entire tracks that'll walk you through how to do some amazing stuff. So here's the link here, Tom. There we go. And if you go there, you'll see all the different tracks. So take a look at the thing that says learning paths. I'll share my screen and just show you. If I can, there we go. If you can see this, you know, you can click on learning paths and browse all learning options. And you can see, you can actually just look for Xamarin. I think, is it mobile? I know it's here somewhere. Maybe it's Xamarin. I think it's as simple as that. Yeah, so creating a mobile app. So these are modules, but I remember they have learning paths, see? So here's how to consume REST services. That will be good, but I would start with this one, build mobile apps with Xamarin.Forms. And I'll give you that link. And if you go there, that'll start you along the path. And then when you want to save data in different places, where you want to share things with other people, you'll have a base application you can start with, and then start adding new capabilities. The other thing I think you should learn about as you go through your learning path is source control. So learn about Git in Visual Studio, because as you make changes to your application, you don't want to be that guy that's, you know, making backup copies of all your folders, you know. So as long as you're comfortable with Git, I think your learning curve will be less steep. Good. Sounds like you're hip deep in that. Oh, the COVID app in Fishers. That's working out great. We haven't had any issues with it. It's kind of strange. So if you don't know about it, I built a mobile app for the city of Fishers where we get free COVID testing. And they called me up on a Saturday and said, hey, we need to start scanning people in next week. And we're thinking of using like a laptop and a handheld scanner, and we're going to have a printer in there, and it'll print out labels and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, no. This screams mobile app. They already had a QR code. So we came up with a barcode strategy, and it's a Xamarin.Forms app. And I wrote it in like a day. If you go to Auri.net, just go to my website. Here it is. There's a whole thing about how we built it, and it hasn't crashed at all. It's just been running. We're getting people through the line in 2 minutes. Each patient is 2 minutes. You scan them in, swab, they go out. It's pretty fascinating. So they process what, like 1,000 people a week. Yeah, thanks, John. But yeah, if you go to, let me see if I can look at Auri.net. I should have it in there. Boop, boop, boop. Oh, here it is. Building a COVID patient scanning app in 24 hours. There you go. So if you want to read about that, that's how it was built. And If you're curious how we did anything, just shoot me an email and I'll help you out as best I can. Any other questions? I heard someone unmute. Other than that, any other questions? No? All right. Well, then, thank you all very much. I hope you have a wonderful evening. I'll put the video to this up as soon as it's done processing. I'm going to stop recording now.